Washington. President Trump acknowledged on Sunday that he raised corruption accusations against former Vice President Joseph R. Biden, Jr. during a phone call with Ukraine's leader, a stunning admission as pressure mounted on Democrats to impeach Mr. Trump over allegations he leaned on a foreign government to help damage a political rival. In public and in private, many Democrats said the evidence that has emerged in recent days indicating that Mr. Trump pushed the Ukrainian government to investigate Mr. Biden and his administration's stonewalling of attempts by Congress to learn more, were changing the calculations about whether to charge him with articles of impeachment. The influential chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who has resisted such action, said the House might now have crossed the Rubicon, in light of the new disclosures, and the administration's withholding of a related whistleblower complaint. A group of moderate freshman lawmakers who had been opposed to an impeachment inquiry said they were considering changing course, while other Democrats who had reluctantly supported one amplified the calls. Progressives, meanwhile, sharpened the criticisms of the party's leadership for failing to act. The fast-moving developments prompted Speaker Nancy Pelosi to level a warning of her own to the White House: turn over the secret whistleblower complaint by Thursday, or face a serious escalation from Congress. In a letter to House Democrats, Ms. Pelosi never mentioned the word impeachment, but her message hinted at that possibility. If the administration persists in blocking this whistleblower from disclosing to Congress a serious possible breach of constitutional duties by the president, they will be entering a grave new chapter of lawlessness which will take us into a whole new stage of investigation. Ms. Pelosi, Democrat of California, wrote in the letter. Read the letter Nancy Pelosi sent about the whistleblower complaint. The House Speaker warned of a new phase in the investigation of President Trump if he refuses to hand over the whistleblower complaint. One page, 0.11 megabytes. The allegations center on whether Mr. Trump pressured Ukraine's newly elected leader, implicitly or explicitly, to take action to hurt Mr. Biden's election bid at a vulnerable moment for the former Soviet republic, possibly using United States military aid as leverage. Ukraine has been fighting Russian-backed separatists, and the Trump administration had temporarily been withholding a $250 million package of military funding. There have been no indications to this point, however, that Mr. Trump mentioned the aid money on the call. Trump showed no sign of contrition on Sunday, telling aides that Democrats were overplaying their hand on a matter voters would dismiss. Publicly, he worked to focus attention not on his own actions but on Mr. Biden's. Speaking to reporters, the president defended his July phone call with President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine as entirely appropriate, and stopped short of directly confirming news reports about what was discussed. But he acknowledged that he had discussed Mr. Biden during the call and accused the former vice president of corruption tied to his son Hunter's business activities in the former Soviet republic. The conversation I had was largely congratulatory, with largely corruption, all of the corruption taking place, and largely the fact that we don't want our people like Vice President Biden and his son creating to the corruption already in the Ukraine. Mr. Trump told reporters before leaving for a trip to Texas and Ohio. It is still far from clear that the latest scandal surrounding Mr. Trump's conduct will lead Ms. Pelosi or other top Democrats to bless full impeachment proceedings and a vote. The House Judiciary Committee is already investigating whether to recommend articles of impeachment against Mr. Trump over other matters, but Ms. Pelosi has consistently questioned the strength of the case. Proponents of impeachment have repeatedly pointed to damaging revelations, including several instances of possible obstruction of justice by Mr. Trump detailed by the special counsel investigating Russia's interference in the 2016 election that they believe warrant seeking Mr. Trump's removal. But they have run into resistance or indifference from their colleagues and the general public, in part because any impeachment proceeding could end in an acquittal by the Republican-controlled Senate. On Sunday, the pattern appeared to be holding, with the vast majority of Republican lawmakers refraining from comment about the latest allegations against Mr. Trump. A few prominent lawmakers suggested, however, that the White House should disclose the contents of the phone call with Mr. Zelensky. "I'm hoping the president can share in an appropriate way information to deal with the drama around the phone call," said Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. "I think it would be good for the country if we could deal with it." Senator Mitt Romney of Utah, the Republican presidential nominee in 2012, was more critical, deeming it critical for the facts to come out, and saying, if the president asked or pressured Ukraine's president to investigate his political rival, either directly or through his personal attorney, it would be troubling in the extreme. Image listened to The Daily. The president, Joe Biden, and Ukrainian secret whistleblower complaint has raised questions about whether President Trump improperly pressured a foreign government to investigate a political opponent. Transcript back to The Daily bars 000 2235 to 2235. Transcript listened to The Daily. The President, Joe Biden, and Ukraine, hosted by Michael Barbaro, produced by Jessica Chung and Luke van der Ploeg, and edited by Larissa Anderson. A secret whistleblower complaint has raised questions about whether President Trump improperly pressured a foreign government to investigate a political opponent. Michael Barbaro from The New York Times. I'm Michael Barbaro. This is The Daily. Over the weekend, reports of an unknown whistleblower with unnamed complaints against the president turned into allegations that President Trump courted foreign interference from Ukraine to hurt his leading Democratic rival, Joe Biden. The president is calling it a witch hunt and saying it's Biden who is engaged in corruption. Mike Schmidt on whether Ukraine is shaping up to be the Russia of 2020. It's Monday, September 23rd. Mike, take me back to when you first learn about this whistleblower complaint. Michael Schmidt. So earlier this month, we started to hear that there was a whistleblower that had some type of information, and that Capitol Hill was struggling to get their hands on it. Michael Barbaro, K. Michael Schmidt. And then last Wednesday, the Washington Post reported that that complaint came from someone in the intelligence community, and it involved contact between the president and a foreign leader. Music. Michael Barbaro. So what did you do? Michael Schmidt. So we jumped on the story, because all of a sudden, hold on, there's someone in the intelligence community that thinks that the president has done something so egregious that they are trying to get the word about this out somehow. What is it that the president could have done? What does it involve? What did he do that was so extreme that what appears to be a regular civil servant went so far as to file a whistleblower complaint, which is very significant, on the person who leads the executive branch? Michael Barbaro. So what do you find about this complaint? Michael Schmidt. Well, what we learn about this complaint is that it had been made to someone known as the Intelligence Community Inspector General, the ICIG, in Washington lingo. He is the watchdog for the intelligence community. And we learn that he has looked at this allegation and found it credible, but despite that, he's been unable to pass that information along to Congress, who he reports to on how he is policing and keeping a watch over the intelligence community. Michael Barbaro. And why is he having trouble getting this whistleblower complaint to Congress? Michael Schmidt. The system is set up for whistleblowers to come forward about government wrongdoing, and for that information to go to an inspector general, and for it to be reported to Congress. But what happens if it involves the President of the United States? And what happens if it involves potentially privileged conversations the President of the United States was having? What had happened is that the ICIG had been unsure how to deal with this, had looked at this and said, "Oh, what do I do?" and had consulted with the Justice Department. And the Justice Department had said, "No, you cannot give this to Congress." Technically, the ICIG actually is part of the executive branch, and by extension, works for the President. And the Trump administration is saying, hey, executive branch employee, you can't do anything with that. You work for us, and we're telling you no. So at this point, we know that the complaint involves the president, a conversation he had with a foreign leader, and something that bothered the intelligence community. And those three things are a potentially huge deal for any president. So we dig in as hard as we can to try and find out any little bit more we can about what is in this complaint, and what it relates directly to. And in the process of that, we learn something interesting. Michael Barbaro wedges what Michael Schmidt it involves Ukraine music. Michael Barbaro add what is it about Ukraine that starts to signal what this conversation might have been about Michael Schmidt. So there are two pretty interesting data points. The first is that for several months, the United States, through Trump, has been withholding hundreds of millions of dollars in aid that the Ukrainians say that they need to protect their own sovereignty and protect themselves from the Russians. And that brings us to the second data point about Ukraine. And that's that in the past several months, as the president and his surrogates have moved their attention towards attacking Joe Biden, archived recording Chris Cuomo, we happen to have the man in the middle tonight, Michael Schmidt, the president's supporters, specifically his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, archived recording Chris Cuomo, good to have you on the show, archived recording Rudy Giuliani, I'm glad I'm on tonight, because what you just said is totally erroneous. Michael Schmidt have been pushing the notion that, archived recording Rudy Giuliani, when Biden got the prosecutor fired, the new prosecutor who Biden approved, you don't get to approve a prosecutor in a foreign country unless something fishy is going on. Michael Schmidt, the presidential candidate Joe Biden has corrupt ties to the Ukraine and needs to be investigated because of that. Archived recording Rudy Giuliani, the new prosecutor dropped a case not just on Biden's kid and the crooked company that Biden's kid worked for, Burisma, that was done as a matter of record in October of 2016, after the guy got tanked. Michael Schmidt thought Giuliani has tried to exploit is the fact that Biden's son Hunter was on the board of a Ukrainian energy company that has been accused of wrongdoing. And Giuliani has essentially been saying that when Biden was vice president, he pushed to have a prosecutor in Ukraine fired in order to prevent the prosecutor from looking into allegations related to his son's business dealings there. Archived recording Rudy Giuliani, and you won't cover it. And you want to cover some ridiculous charge that I urged the Ukrainian government to investigate corruption. Well, I did, and I'm proud of it. Archived recording Chris Cuomo, then it's not a ridiculous allegation. You just admitted it. Archived recording Rudy Giuliani. It's a ridiculous allegation. Archived recording Chris Cuomo. You just admitted it. Michael Barbaro add that, of course, would be in the service of embarrassing and hurting Joe Biden's presidential candidacy. Michael Schmidt, don't make any bones about it. They're out to defeat him in 2020 and are fairly open about the fact that they are trying to hurt his candidacy. They see him as potentially the biggest threat to a Trump re-election. Michael Barbaro add Mike, is there any legitimacy, as best we can tell, to what Giuliani is saying about Biden's son and what action Biden took? Michael Schmidt, from what we can see, there is no evidence to back up these claims by Giuliani. And in fact, it wasn't Joe Biden's decision to have this prosecutor removed. Many world leaders in organizations were calling for this prosecutor to be ousted. Michael Barbaro, so given those data points of the things we already knew about Ukraine, how does it connect back to this whistleblower complaint? Michael Schmidt, well, we're starting to wonder whether the fact that the Ukrainians wanted this money, that Trump was holding back on it, and that Trump wanted the Ukrainians to investigate this was at the heart of what the complaint was about. Then we learned that on July 25, Trump had a phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. On 8 different occasions on that call, Trump told Zelensky that he should investigate these allegations and share the findings with Giuliani. Michael Barbaro add, do we know if the money that Ukraine wanted from the Trump administration, whether that came up during the call? Michael Schmidt, we don't know whether it came up, but we do know that earlier this month, the Trump administration released that money to the Ukrainians. Music. Michael Barbaro, I just want to piece this together. You have laid out a scenario in which President Trump calls the president of Ukraine and presses him to investigate his political opponent's son, and all the while, it would very much be in the air that he controls $250 million that president of Ukraine wants, while he is proposing that president of Ukraine basically do him a political favor. Michael Schmidt. Correct. Michael Barber. I'll be right back. Okay, so that's more or less where the story stands on Sunday. Michael Schmidt eyes. And then, archived recording Mr. President, Mr. President Michael Schmidt. Trump comes out and addresses the media about the allegation. Archived recording. Donald Trump. We had a great conversation. The conversation I had was largely congratulatory. Michael Schmidt says that he had a conversation with the president of Ukraine. Archived recording. Donald Trump. The fact that we don't want our people, like Vice President Biden and his son, creating the corruption already in the Ukraine. Michael Schmidt brought up Joe Biden. Archived recording. Donald Trump. But what he said is that he wouldn't give, I think it was billions of dollars to Ukraine unless they fired the prosecutor who was looking at his son and his son's company, the company that his son worked with, and that's a very dishonest thing. Michael Schmidt and believes that there is real wrongdoing that is not being examined. Michael Barber. Also, the president acknowledges having a conversation with the president of Ukraine in which he complains about Biden's son, accuses the two of them of corruption. I have to say, for those who believe the president pressured Zelensky to investigate his rival, it certainly feels like Trump is giving him a fair bit to work with. Michael Schmidt. Correct. The president appears to have given his political opponents a fresh avenue to go down as they try and investigate him. Michael Barber. Michael Schmidt. Trump often wants to get institutions, whether it's the FBI or Justice Department, or, in this case, a foreign country, to investigate his rivals and for his rivals to be tarnished by that investigation. And to me, it fit a pattern that we had seen with him. And here he is doing it again, but at the same time, giving the Democrats an entirely new issue to push in their effort to prove that he's corrupt. Michael Barber. I'm struck by the timing. Because you mentioned that this phone call that President Trump had with the president of Ukraine happened in late July, so that's right after the Mueller report comes out, which is a years-long investigation into meddling in an American election by a foreign government. And yet, here we are. Michael Schmidt. The call occurs the day after Mueller testifies. At that point, it's pretty clear that the president is going to pay no real political consequences for the contacts that his campaign had with Russia during the election, including meeting with the Russians about dirt that the Russians claimed to have on Hillary Clinton. So why, if the president, in his own mind, thinks he survives the Mueller investigation, why wouldn't he continue that behavior if he hasn't had to face a consequence for it? Michael Barber. So where do things stand now? Archived recording. We're just getting a statement from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on this most recent news with regards to the whistleblower report. Michael Schmidt. So Democrats see this as the gravest abuse of power that Trump has done since coming to office. Archived recording. Error is what she says. If the president has done what has been alleged, then he is stepping into a dangerous minefield with serious repercussions for his administration and our democracy. Michael Schmidt. They believe there's a freshness to this, and they can use this as a new way of investigating the president and hopefully getting that to resonate with the public in ways that Russia did not. Michael Barber. Mike, why would this be the gravest? Michael Schmidt. And the case of Russia. Russia appears to have been the one reaching out to the Trump campaign to help them. In this case, the sitting president of the United States may have been using his diplomatic power to pressure a foreign country to do work for him that would benefit his campaign. It's a proactive use of power that we have not seen before. The other thing is that when the 2016 contacts between Russians and Trump associates happened, Trump was not president. He had no presidential powers to push the Russians on different things. In this instance, he is the president, and he's sort of mixing together diplomacy and political operations that would benefit himself. Michael Barbaromike. In the end, how important is it to what happens next in this case whether or not this conversation that President Trump is now acknowledging happened, encouraging Ukraine to investigate Biden's son, that it ever involved a discussion about money, that it was a quid pro quo? Michael Schmidt. Well, on one hand, it would be hugely important, because it would show the quid pro quo and what would be given in exchange for the help. There would be a, hey, you do this, I'll give you this. But on the other hand, why does it matter? If you're the President of the United States and you're asking a far smaller country that's dependent on you to do something, isn't money essentially already on the line? Isn't it sort of implicit that if you're speaking to the President of the United States and he's asking you to do something, that you could face a financial consequence or benefit because of that? Michael Barbaro. I wonder if this is starting to feel like the 2020 version of 2016, where Republicans will say that what should really be investigated is Biden, and Democrats will say no, what should be investigated is Trump's conduct. Michael Schmidt. Yeah. In 2016, it was all about Trump saying that Hillary Clinton was corrupt, and the Democrats saying, but look at you. And here we are again, but in Clinton's place, we have Biden. And we have the Republicans saying, why isn't anyone looking into Biden's corruption? And it's this sort of split-screen redux of what we saw. And in the coming months, you can see the political argument breaking down in the same fashion that they did in 2016. Music. Michael Barbaro. Thank you, Michael. Michael Schmidt. Thanks for having me, Michael Barbaro. I'll be right back. Here's what else you need to know today. Archived recording. Joe Biden. Here's what I know. I know Trump deserves to be investigated. He is violating every basic norm of a president. Michael Barbaro. Over the weekend, during a campaign event in Iowa, Joe Biden addressed Trump's phone call with the president of Ukraine, calling it an abuse of power. Archived recording. Joe Biden. Why is he on the phone with a foreign leader trying to intimidate a foreign leader, if that's what happened? That appears what happened. Trump's doing this because he knows I'll beat him like a drum, and he's using the abuse of power and every element of the presidency to try to do something to smear me. Michael Barbaro asked about the allegations of wrongdoing made by Giuliani and Trump. Biden said there was no truth to them. Archived recording. Joe Biden. Everybody looked at this, and everybody who's looked at it said there's nothing there. Michael Barbaro. The fate of the whistleblower's complaint remains uncertain. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff has subpoenaed it from the Director of National Intelligence, Joseph Maguire, who refused to comply. Maguire is scheduled to publicly testify about the case before Schiff's committee on Thursday. That's it for The Daily. I'm Michael Barbaro. See you tomorrow. At the same time, interviews with more than a dozen Democratic lawmakers this weekend made clear that they believed the latest allegations had the potential to be singularly incriminating, with the potential to advance the impeachment drive just as it appeared to be losing steam. Not only do the allegations suggest that Mr. Trump was using the power of his office to extract political gains from a foreign power, they argued, but his administration is actively trying once again to prevent Congress from finding out what happened. I don't want to do any more to contribute to the divisiveness in the country, but my biggest responsibility as an elected official is to protect our national security and Constitution, said Representative Debbie Dingell of Michigan, adding that it is becoming more and more difficult for Democrats to avoid an all-out impeachment inquiry. Several first-term lawmakers who had opposed impeachment conferred privately over the weekend to discuss announcing support for an inquiry, potentially jointly, after a hearing scheduled for Thursday with the acting National Intelligence Director, according to Democratic officials familiar with the conversations. A handful of them declined to speak on the record over the weekend, with some still reluctant to go public and others looking for cues from Ms. Pelosi and the freshman colleagues. Representative Tom Malinowski, a New Jersey freshman who has supported an inquiry, said the fresh revelations made it clear that Congress must move more decisively. There are lines being crossed right now that I fear will be erased if the House does not take strong action to assert them, to defend them, he said in an interview. If all we do is leave it up to the American people to get rid of him, we have not upheld the rule of law, we have not set a precedent that this behavior is utterly out of bounds, the Intelligence Committee Chairman, Representative Adam B. Schiff of California, said Sunday morning that the accumulating evidence of wrongdoing, and of a presidential cover-up unfolding in real time, left the House with few other options. Schiff spoke with Ms. Pelosi before making his remarks to coordinate the statements. Two people familiar with the conversation said, a sign that the Speaker may be more comfortable moving toward a direct discussion of impeachment. I have been very reluctant to go down the path of impeachment, Mr. Schiff said on CNN. But if the president is essentially withholding military aid at the same time he is trying to browbeat a foreign leader into doing something illicit, providing dirt on his opponent during a presidential campaign, then that may be the only remedy that is co-equal to the evil that conduct represents. Mr. Schiff first brought the existence of the whistleblower complaint to light a little more than a week ago, and has been the party's lead negotiator with the acting Director of National Intelligence, who has refused to turn it over to Congress. Progressives in Congress have watched the stonewalling with seething frustration, and in recent days, they have begun to openly second-guess Ms. Pelosi's go-slow approach. At this point, the bigger national scandal isn't the president's law-breaking behavior, it is the Democratic Party's refusal to impeach him for it. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat of New York, who commands considerable influence among progressives, wrote on Twitter late Saturday night. Representative Pramila Jayapal, Democrat of Washington and the co-chairwoman of the Progressive Caucus, said in an interview that she was now ready to vote outright to impeach Mr. Trump, rather than simply continuing the investigation, and that she planned to make her case in public. There is no congressional authority anymore that we are being allowed to exercise, except the one that we have not exercised yet, Ms. Jayapal said. But the more crucial issue is whether Democrats from the districts Mr. Trump won or nearly lost can stomach a push to expel him. Representative Dina Titus of Nevada said once a transcript is made public of Mr. Trump pressuring Mr. Zelensky, she doubted that even Democrats from competitive seats could continue to resist impeachment once that comes out, said Ms. Titus, an impeachment proponent. I don't see how they can fight it any longer. Strikingly, some traditionally cautious veteran Democrats said the party might have no choice but to move toward impeachment. They believe that Senate Republicans, who are clinging to their majority of 53 seats, would pay a political price for protecting Mr. Trump if they voted to exonerate him in the face of damning evidence of malfeasance and a House vote to impeach. They've got to take a second look at impeachment. Terry McAuliffe, the former Virginia governor and National Party chairman, who is an ally of Ms. Pelosi, said of fellow Democrats. He predicted that the latest revelations would push some of our folks over. James Carville, the longtime Democratic strategist, said he had opposed impeachment but now thinks the House should move quick and clean after obtaining a transcript of Mr. Trump's phone call. Let the Senate Republicans chew, he said. Nicholas Fandos and Jonathan Martin reported from Washington, and Maggie Haberman from New York. Peter Baker contributed reporting from Washington. Ukraine and whistleblower issues emerge as major flashpoints in presidential race. Sept. 21, 2019. Trump pressed Ukraine's leader on inquiry into Biden's concept. 2019. Is it an impeachment inquiry or not? Democrats can't seem to agree. Sept. 11, 2019. Let's block ads. Why?